Most importantly, I'd like to really invite you to come to the front row and fill up the space because, that way we can have that nice energetic exchange. You gonna do it? Will you do it? Pardon? Okay, so as you trickle back in, I do want to invite people to really use the front rows and come a little bit closer so that when you ask your questions, there's that real energetic exchange. So can I ask some of you to just move right up here? Will you do that for me? Thank you. Thank you so much, Ephraim. Okay, if there's anyone still on the 9th floor, if we can ask them to come down because we're going to get started. Okay, with that, I would like to welcome our incredible panel to the stage, please. I'd like to welcome Justin Ling, Suzie Dunn, and Marlene Floyd. Oh, it's you. Oh, I'm so sorry. Apologies. Okay. Maybe you will. Maybe you can join us. Sorry about that, Dana. Apologies. So I'd like to now welcome Dana Cramer to the podium to share a talk for all of us, and then we'll proceed with our next panel.
Wonderful. Everyone can hear me okay? Wonderful. So hello, my name is Dana Cramer. About a year and a half ago, I resurrected an organization called Youth IGF Canada and began building it as a youth nonprofit, which would hold the annual Canada Youth IGF, as well as host activities and launch initiatives throughout the calendar year to build the next generation of Canadian Internet leaders. On the 27th of September, we held the first ever Canada Youth IGF in Toronto in collaboration with the dais at Toronto Metropolitan University. Before I get into a summary of the Youth IGF, I wanted to start with why youth participation in internet governance is so key. Recently, I was reviewing Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn's seminal article proposing TCP/IP, or the internet, published 50 years ago. When they wrote this article, they were 31 and 35 years old, respectively. 31 and 35. They would have taken all they learned and their ability to meet and work with each other, which they would have gained these networks throughout their 20s, that they could then envision a technology which would transform the world. It's in these moments of realization that when we empower young people, those in the 18 to 30 age range, with opportunities to learn, network, and build themselves up professionally and personally, that as they move into the next phases of their lives, they can bring all of these experiences and what they dream as innovations, which will connect and change our world forever. It becomes crucial then to support these youth, especially in the internet governance environment. Youth are in a precarious position as internet stakeholders. Without yet starting their careers or potentially still trying out various workplaces, their stakeholder positionality is not firm, thereby excluding them from consultation in internet governance environments. With these youth excluded, we miss out on their views for technology development and use cases, user experience, and policies for governing our digital world. As a generation who has grown up alongside the internet, they know it and how it can be envisioned in the future, which was a comment raised by Senator Andrew Cardozo in the Youth IGF's opening remarks. We therefore all have a responsibility to include youth. This became the framework of the inaugural Canada Youth IGF. The forum had 88 unique in-person attendees throughout the day and an approximate count of 40 virtual attendees. Age ranges included as young as 19 and as old as 70 for those who wanted to be part of the Canada Youth IGF. 2/3 of attendees were youth in the defined 18 to 30 age range and 1/3 as over 30. The Youth IGF was generously supported by a Sierra NetGood grant as the overall sponsor, with ICANN serving as lunch sponsor and a Catalyst at Toronto Metropolitan University serving as the venue sponsor. Sierra's Net Good grant allowed us to do something special for this inaugural Youth IGF, which was to bring in 18 youth from across Canada, spanning from 9 provinces and 2 territories, with rural and remote participants prioritized. These youth were selected for travel support if they were self-described as Indigenous, persons with disabilities, young women working to end technology-facilitated gender-based violence, and were overall hoping to become future Internet leaders. We offered 20 of these travel supports, but 2 were unable to attend due to unforeseen circumstances, thereby leaving us with our 18 number. At the forum, we were honored to have panelists from organizations such as ICANN, the Indigenous Friends Association, Points Quebec, TypoSec, North End Connect and the Indigenous Connectivity Institute, TELUS, the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, Innovation Science and Economic Development Canada, Asia, Open Media, the Centre for International Governance Innovation, and the University of Toronto. We were especially elated to have the Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, Arif Barani, to provide our keynote address about Bill C-63, otherwise known as the proposed Online Harms Act, which he is shepherding through Parliament. Opening remarks were given by Senator Andrew Cardozo. Closing remarks were provided by CRTC Commissioner for Ontario, Bram Abramson, with a final word by Sierra's Georgia Evans. Across the panels, we found that Canadian youth are connected with how the internet is developing in a way which might exclude identifiable population groups such as racialized women, Indigenous peoples, and those who do not have access to an abundance of opportunities, such as those outside of key metropolitan areas in Canada, namely Montreal to Windsor Corridor. Many of the questions throughout the day raised by the audience centered on how to provide solutions to complex internet governance topics from a youth perspective. Overall, panelists spoke to the importance of communities in collaboration with government stakeholders to uplift Canadians who might be vulnerable and young leaders who can provide a vision for a better country and a better internet for us all. There was an incredible level of interest in future internet governance opportunities for youth to become more embedded in this space. At Youth IGF Canada, we're aware of various youth applying for and being selected to ICANN newcomer opportunities, such as Next Gen and Fellowship programs. We're also aware of 2 Canadian youth competing for positions as youth ambassadors with the Internet Society in 2025 as a result of learning about this at the forum. Canada has had seldom representation in this Internet Society program over the years, aside from this past with myself in this role. We're also aware of youth in Canada becoming energized by these internet governance spaces and beginning fellowships in the regional internet registry space, and youth further connecting with organizations and politicians to help shape future digital policy in Canada, whom they made these networks with at the Canada Youth IGF. Our early instinct as an organization is that this year's inaugural Canada Youth IGF has become a spark and a catalyst of change for a new generation of Canadian youth to enter the internet governance sphere. We, however, will need the rest of the Canadian internet governance community to ensure this flame continues to burn. I would encourage you all to create spaces which invite youth to this community, offer your wisdom, mentorship, time, and if possible for youth-led projects in internet governance, your financial resources, to ensure that Canadian youth will lead in the future of internet governance in our country and on international stages. We also have the draft report now available on our website. This is a draft to receive community input from attendees over the next 2 weeks for its finalization. In the report, we provide summaries of each session of what was the Canada Youth IGF program, along with preparation information and other logistical elements as specified in the United Nations Global IGF National Regional Initiatives Toolkit for post-forum reporting. The 14 days draft is also part of these toolkit requirements as a recognized NRI. I would also like to thank the broader organizing committee for the 2024 Canada Youth IGF, whose hard work pulled off this inaugural event. This team was spread over 5 provinces, representing regional diversity and plurality. Mira Gillis, Windsor, Ontario; Juliana Colasser, Toronto, Ontario; James Caldwell, Glen Levitt, New Brunswick; Skylar Johnson, Winnipeg, Manitoba; Hamad Khan, Edmonton, Alberta; Luzelle Marcos, Toronto, Ontario; Harnor Josen, Kelowna, BC; Shannon Tom, Toronto, Ontario; Wyatt Jerome, Edmonton, Alberta; Lane McCrory, Toronto, Ontario; Ellen Taylor, at the time, Toronto, Ontario, Nathaniel Sakedo, Victoria, BC, Bianca Salamis, Vancouver, BC, Jared McGill, Surrey, BC, and Polina Leograd, Toronto, Ontario. We have had some recent adjustments to our broader executive team at Youth IGF Canada, but this organizing committee's labor throughout this spring and summer of the past year was appreciated by all of the attendees of the Youth IGF in September and have allowed for a new horizon in stakeholder consultation in Canadian internet governance to include the youth as stakeholders from all of Canada. Thank you.
So I'd like to thank Dana very much for the insightful and articulate youth readout of the Youth Internet Governance Forum in Canada, and congratulations on really living the values of pluralism and multi-stakeholderism. So now it is time for the panel that I mentioned earlier, and apologies again for that. So now we'll have how democracy is faring in the deepfake era, and I will re-welcome Suzie, Dunn, Justin, Ling, and Marlene Floyd to the stage. Okay, so I'm really excited to get into conversation today because as we can see here, we have three representatives of very different sectors and industries with law and academia, journalism, and tech and corporate. So I think what I'll start off by saying is that we know that deepfakes are significantly challenging democracy in 2024 by undermining trust in information, disrupting elections, and exacerbating polarization. We know that AI-generated video and audio clips are very convincing and mimic real people, spread false narratives, and really are sowing quite a bit of discord and undermining trust. So I heard someone discuss earlier robocalls who are impersonating political leaders and suppressing voter turnout efforts and spreading misinformation. I think we're going to get into all of that today and really understand what this means on a deeper level. So I think we have to start with, the elephant in the room. We're here on the heels of the US election and with a new political realignment. I think many of us during the break were really discussing, some of the concerns we have around the guardrails that have been put into place around what a responsible internet really looks like in practice. So I'm wondering what, if any, were the impacts of Gen AI on the election? Marlene, can we start with you?
Okay, is this on? Am I good? Okay. Look, I think the first thing and why we're here today is because strong democracies is the basis of our entire, for us, for a corporation. And so we at Microsoft have spent an extensive amount of time and effort of working on electoral integrity and making sure that we have a robust cybersecurity systems in our election authorities with our political parties, but also that we're starting to look at these really big technology issues like the deceptive use of AI during electoral campaigns. When we look at the US election in particular, I think we've started right at the beginning here. I think there are some things that we need to think about in terms of what we're seeing. We did see generative AI being used, and we have to start from this perspective, is that generative AI can be used for good. It can be used for creation of content. It can be used for creation of drafts of speeches, of things like that, ways that political parties and candidates can get their message out. But it can also be used in deceptive ways. We did see nation-state actors, and Microsoft, through our Microsoft Threat Analysis Center, which is based in New York City, issued 5 different reports on the US election. So there was use of deepfakes and AI during the campaign, mainly by nation-state actors. Russia in particular, we saw attacking the Harris campaign. But I want to caveat with this. It really wasn't consumed that much. We didn't see the use of deepfakes the way that everybody was fearful we were. Actually, the most effective was the traditional, boring, type of influence campaigns, using social media, using manipulative videos, doing, having bots, having these type of activities. And we didn't actually see that proliferation of deep fakes that we anticipated. And even more so than that, we didn't see, if you saw a deep fake, and we'll probably talk about this later, as I think we're going to look at some of them, they kind of look fake, right? They're not that good yet. I say yet, right? And I think there's things that we can be doing in order to work on that, in order to ensure that we have that, that we know what we're consuming. And I think there's things that tech and industry and political parties and everyone can be doing. So with that, that's my one piece is, yes, we saw it. We saw cybersecurity intrusions much more. We saw, and we saw influence campaigns using that tried and tested approach on social media platforms and algorithms more than we did deepfakes.
Thanks for that, Marlene. And I'm also wondering if you can take a moment to set up what people are seeing on the screen here, really just speaking to
okay.
the sophistication.
I can't see it, so I didn't know we were going to start with this, but then we kind of teed me up. Okay, so, is it here? Yeah, okay, I can't see, so I'm going to put my glasses on. So, at Microsoft, we actually do a significant amount of trainings on what we're seeing with deepfakes. And so this is, if you want to scan on this, at any given time, you can take a quiz. Is this real or not? So I'm going to go through a series of photos. And we're not in real time here. Real or not? I think, is this real or not? Okay, everybody in the audience, do you think it's real?
Hands up for real.
Real, hands up for real. Hands up for not. That's artificial. Real or not?
Hands up for real. Okay, hands up for not.
Hands up for not. Artificial.
Marlene, we have it right here as well.
Oh,
so yeah.
perfect. Okay, thank you. This one, real or not? Real, hands up. Not. Artificial. Real or not? Real, hands up. Not. That one's real.
I got 80% on this, by the way, so that's the benchmark you're shooting for, I think.
I did not. I got
85.
one right. I got one right when I took this quiz, when I was pulling these photos earlier. But I think that just shows this is what we're working with, right? At a quick glance, without that critical thinking of like, hey, did this make sense? Oh, now we're, I don't know.
That's all right. We'll look cycle through.
But you often will see this type of image, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you're we'll see nation state actors use it at scale, trying to create images, but they're very cartoony looking, right? So you can kind of be like, that doesn't make sense to me. And then we're seeing a lot of that in satire and that type of thing. So.
Oh yeah, just quickly, show of hands, real? No, that one's fake.
Okay.
So as you can see, we want this to be, a two-way session full of audience engagement. I want to keep going on that thread, but I do want to ask Justin a very quick question first around these kinds of cute, seemingly harmless images that we see online with, we'll use Trump as an example. To what extent, even though we know this is humor, even though we know it's just a little bit of fun, is there a harm there? Like, does it provide, or I guess that depends on your views, but is there, what is the effect? Is there some subliminal messaging? Is there emotional connection to being able to make people smile? Does it soften things?
It's a good question, and I'm going to come back to it. I'm going to loop around and come back to it at the end, because obviously during the U.S. presidential election, I spent a considerable amount of time in the communities where a lot of misinformation and conspiracy theories permeate. I spent a lot of time in the spaces on the broadcast channels where Donald Trump and his supporters talk to each other and try and convince the masses. And having spent a lot of time there, having seen some of the AI-generated images and video and audio percolate, I've come to the sort of heretical view that yes, it's there, and no, it doesn't really matter. At the very least, no, it doesn't matter in the kind of way we expected that it would, right? No one's looking at this image of Donald Trump in a superhero outfit climbing out of the reflecting pool in the Capitol with the Drain the Swamp signs, and no one's looking at that and going, oh, okay, yeah, Donald Trump, he's my man, right? We have to sort of be realistic about how this AI-generated content is being used, why it's being used, and we sort of need to disabuse ourselves of the notion of this sort of nefarious impersonation threat that we've developed and we've had in our minds for a number of years. And just to rewind a little bit, I was actually in Riga, Latvia in 2017, I think. And I got to go visit the NATO Center of Excellence for Strategic Communication. This is the NATO hub that is really the front lines in dealing with Russian-based disinformation campaigns, really looking at the very front lines of some of their hacking efforts. And they started picking up on the very earliest iterations of AI-generated content, and particularly deepfakes. And I remember speaking to these two analysts there, and they had just witnessed some of the earliest usages of AI deepfakes kind of in the real world. And they were telling me, this is coming. This is starting to happen. We're already seeing it. And I said, did it work? Yeah. And they went, no, of course not. No, not at all. No one believed this. It was just completely irrelevant. There was really no incentive to share this because there was really no corroborating information behind it. Russian actors had sort of pumped it out in the midst of a broader misinformation campaign that was already not really working. And what they quickly found was that narratives that spoke to values did start working, but that deep fakes that tried to convince people of an alternate reality or a slightly different reality that we have didn't really work. And in the years since, despite a lot of warning, despite a lot of research going in to this question, despite a lot of preparations, we haven't really seen it operationalized in any meaningful way. Now, that doesn't mean it's not being used, right? As we're seeing in some of these images, they're being shared constantly. But they are being shared as a value add to existing narratives and existing misinformation. The AIs themselves are not supposed to dupe you. They are a pot sweetener for an existing narrative that is already taking hold in these communities. They're not trying to convince the undecided, they're trying to harden the already decided, right? And what you're seeing in a lot of cases is people sharing deepfakes or AI-generated content who say explicitly, I don't care if it's not real, or I know it's not real. You even heard during the U.S. presidential election, Vice President J.D. Vance and then later the president himself, refer to narratives that had been hardened with AI-generated images, whether that's the insinuation that Haitian migrants are eating cats, and it birthed images like this. And you heard Vance and Trump say explicitly, it doesn't really matter how true it is because it speaks to something true. And they actually called on their supporters to start producing more memes. They refer to these sort of things as memes, suggesting and implying they know it's not true, but that it hits at something that feels true. And to me, that is the ultimate threat of AI-generated images, is that it is part and parcel of a deeper threat in our society, which is the fundamental erosion of trust, the weaponization of lies and mistruths, and the gaming of our national and political discourse for nefarious ends. But I worry, and this is where the heresy comes in, I worry that if we start trying to solve for this problem, for the issue around deepfakes, for the question of AI-generated content, I worry if we start trying to solve for that, we'll lose sight of the broader problem, which is that there is an incentive for bad actors to lie, to cheat, to spread conspiracy theories, and that any regulation that tries to capture AI-generated images will ultimately waste time, energy, and political capital solving for the wrong thing.
That's very helpful, Justin. You actually anticipated my next question. I think I'll still read the quote I was going to use as a prompt, though, and get everyone to weigh in, and perhaps you can start. So there's a really good quote from Brian Barrett, who's executive editor at Wired magazine, who commented, if you're baffled by how Trump won so big, one reasonable explanation, and the one that Democrats will have to confront head on, is not that millions of voters are trapped in echo chambers and filter bubbles and scrambled by misinformation. It's that they've seen Trump fully for who he is and voted. So, I wanted to ask a sub question to what you shared. I know you were on the ground in Washington as a lot of this was manifesting. What did you observe in relation to our conversation today and the comment you just made?
Yeah, I mean, I think that quote is very apt, and not just because he's a colleague of mine at Wired, but I think what is abundantly clear is that there was a feeling, and this feeling has, I think, cut across, let's call it anti-elite, illiberal, distrustful, reactionary movements in the U.S. and elsewhere, going back a decade now. There's a feeling like they are being talked down to, like they are being swatted on the nose with a rolled up newspaper, like they are being corrected constantly. And a lot of the times you get this feeling from them of, we're not stupid, we don't need to be fact checked, and we don't trust you to begin with. And all of those sentiments don't get solved by people going, oh, actually, that's not real, that's AI generated. That, if anything, I think forces people to further bunker down and reject, what they perceive as elite sentiment. So I think you saw that time and time again during the U.S. presidential election. There was a class of people saying, okay, I don't care if Haitians in Springfield, Ohio are eating swans out of the lake. What I care about is the border, and this thing has got us talking about the border. Meanwhile, my colleagues, and I think maybe I even bear some blame for this as well, but my colleagues, the Democratic Party, the liberal elites as they are, we're playing this game of saying, oh, that's not real. That's an AI-generated image. Oh, maybe this is Russia promulgating this conspiracy theory. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Meanwhile, the people who are actually kind of emotionally invested in this misinformation, because that is a thing worth considering, misinformation narratives tend to get emotional and partisan buy-in. The people who are emotionally invested in this misinformation were saying, like, we're trying to talk about big things, and you're trying to correct us on this little thing. And I think that is a really powerful disconnect in the conversation that's going to take a lot to sort of fix. And I think, again, the more we spend our time trying to devise new fact-checking methods, trying to, and listen, there's a really good argument to be made that authenticity initiatives and that helping people delineate real from fake is important in terms of hardening against scams, spear phishing, and a bunch of other realities. But on the political side, I really think we may be investing too much time, energy, and money into hardening people against AI-generated slop, when we should be trying to reopen conversations and rebuilding trust in basic institutions as a way of thwarting this emotional investment in misinformation.
Thanks, Justin. I feel like you always do such a great job of really being able to set the tone of what's happening on the ground, so we appreciate it. Suzie, I'd love to bring you into conversation now and really build a little bit off of, what some of the long-term implications of information disorder have really been, not just with deepfakes and beyond. So I'm wondering if you can contextualize things a little bit more for us. Deepfakes are obviously not being used on their own to influence people and potentially electors. And I'm also wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about, what are some of the biggest threats and what's at risk?
Yeah, and I think a lot of things have been said already. There's this focus on deepfakes, and I think it's really easy to focus on deepfakes, even when it comes from policymaking or lawmaking perspective, because deepfakes are such a clear example of something that you can say, here is this technology, here is a false image, here is a false voice, and so we'll regulate against that. So in some ways, there's a simplicity to it. When we actually look at what the larger issue is, there's a multitude of things that are coming out. First, it's this challenge with what do we trust, what institutions do we trust, what images do we trust. I think there's been some media education on, questioning certain images and questioning certain written things. I even remember when the Doge announcement came out, my immediate thought was like, this can't be real, this is fake. And I had to go and double check it and just go through my typical media checks to see if this was actually legitimate information. And so I think with deepfakes, one of the real challenges that's coming up is that now that we can't trust videos, we can't trust audio. And while I agree that the audio or the video content and the image-based content is still pretty easy to pick out as fake, the audio content has been fairly convincing in many circumstances. We haven't seen as much of this happening in the political sphere, but we have seen it happen in personal family scams and business scams, having people transfer money thinking that it is someone's actual voice. And we saw the Joe Biden robocalls, which were some of the more convincing. And I was just watching a Netflix documentary the other day about the London, England mayor, who some audio calls went out, recordings about him talking about Remembrance Day and him disparaging Remembrance Day and supporting a pro-Palestine rally, and how that ended up leading to violence in these particular protests. So I think that there are some risks with deepfakes that we need to worry about, but ultimately it's this degrading of trust in the institution. And then while we're focusing a lot on elections and protecting the electoral process, a lot of my research is on what are the boundaries that we should have in being able to control our own identities, our own voices, and our own images. And then also, when we're not able to control those things, how does this lead to other forms of harassment and abuse, particularly against marginalized political leaders? And even though we know a lot of these deepfakes aren't real, one of the images that goes by is an image of AOC who had a sexualized deepfake made of her. And everyone knows that's not real. When they see it, they know that this isn't a pornographic video of her. But they still see it, and it impacts her sexual integrity. And as a woman, that's a normal part of the political process. And that discourages people from engaging in politics. It discourages women from engaging in politics when people can go out and manipulate your image, manipulate your voice, manipulate your body in ways that you think, should I even bother coming forward and trying, because I'm going to be forced to engage in this really harassing behavior that in many areas, including in Canada, is not yet illegal, even when it comes to sexualized content, which most of us can agree is the type of deepfake that we do want to ban. And then another example that's scrolling through here is there was an audio deepfake of Kamala Harris that was saying, I'm the ultimate DEI hire, right? And then I've got no qualifications. And it was her voice, and again, people think it's fake, they know it's fake. So again, it doesn't really cross the line because it's recognized as satire. But a lot of this content is then used to encourage harassment against political candidates, and memes and deepfakes and generative AI content is used and is not only part of the political process now, but also encouraged. And you look at the way that not only were political advocates for Trump and various other people using this type of thing, but they were pushing it forward. And the response to that is often hate and abuse to people who are engaging in politics. And this is something that I don't know if there's a legal solution to this. I think this is more of a cultural solution, where we've come to accept that this type of content, this type of rhetoric, this type of hateful behavior is a part of the political process, and deepfakes and fake content really amplify it. And now I talk to a lot of journalists, I've talked to a lot of politicians, and things like rape threats, death threats, sexist commentary, racist commentary that's amplified by this type of content. It's just part of the job. It's part of the day-to-day content and context that these politicians are expected to live in. So I think it's another really important piece to think about, not just how is this impacting our electoral integrity, our democratic integrity, but what is this doing to the livelihood and daily experience of politicians who are now expected to accept false content about themselves and ongoing harassment.
I think if we even just look at the rate of resignation of mayors across this country in the last year, I think that, it really I think is a standalone for what you're speaking about. I think one other thing that might be really helpful if you're able to expand on a little bit too is, what happens offline during elections as well, and the connection between gender-based violence and elections, right? And it's not just saved for politicians, correct? It's also for, unfortunately, journalists, advocates, other people who have a public presence and a voice. So yeah, I'm just wondering if you can say a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, and again, and I think most of us are better at this than we were 10 years ago, recognizing how these experiences that happen online, even though they might be false, even though they might be deep fakes, even though they might be satirical blogs, we all know that those experiences filter into our online experience, our offline experiences. At the very least, what we see is the mental health impacts on politicians, on people who are in leadership roles. Their lived experience is much more stressful than it used to be in the past. And the research that I've done on gender-based violence, we did a large survey with the Center for International Governance Innovation, where we surveyed 18,000 people across various countries and asking them, like, what is your experience with these things, with impersonation, with deep fakes, with other forms of online harassment? And in many cases, it's extraordinarily expensive for people because you have real fears in your actual lives. I imagine most politicians have to have a lot more security than they used to. And in a lot of circumstances, people have actually had to move their homes and switch their homes. Because often when this content is posted, this deepfake content, this false content, these false narratives, even things, this isn't a deepfake, but even this questioning of Kamala Harris's ethnic background, right? When that content is often posted, what you'll see is often their contact information, their phone numbers, saying email them, and in many cases that actually includes people's home addresses and home phone numbers. And so it's not just that this is existing in the online sphere, it actually bleeds into people's offline lives where you experience actual harassments and a real sense of lack of safety in their real lives.
Thank you, Suzie. That was very helpful for, I think, broadening, really the issue of deepfakes as they migrate into the real world. Marlene, I'm wondering if we can get you to also weigh in a little bit on some of the core risks and threats and harms as you encountered them at Microsoft.
So when we first talked to the things that we're most concerned about, along with deepfakes and the use of influence campaigns, is really about just the integrity of the system as a whole. We have to remember that when you are a political party here in Canada, you're often like a scale up of very small, and you scale up for a short period of time. Your cyber defenses are very weak. And when you're going up against nation state actors, it's like David and Goliath sometimes, in terms of like the mismatch. And that's where we're still seeing problems. That's where we're still seeing attacks, is at that cyber defense level. And that's really where we've focused a lot of our efforts. So kind of stepping away from the deep fakes, because I think we're fixated on this deep fake kind of conversation, but the issue is so much broader than that. I think Justin hit it really well of talking about broader influence campaigns that are really stemmed from societal issues, right? Like, the Russians just don't decide that there's an immigration problem in America. That's something that's inherent within that discourse, and they're just amplifying it. How are they figuring these things out? It's through cyber campaigns. So we are seeing a connection between cyber activities. So this is actual phishing, hacking of not just political parties, not just governments, of not-for-profits, of think tanks, anyone that is advising government. Why? It's intel gathering, right? So they're trying to get as much information as possible. Then, so that's like the operations, that's like the cyber team within a department. They then use that information in order to create the influence campaigns. Right? So we often see those things happening side by side, and more often, which is why we at Microsoft, we actually have what we call a Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center, which is tracking nation state actors as they're attempting on cyber issues. That works in conjunction with our team that's working on influence operations, because we're finding that those two things are intertwined in a level that we've never seen before. And so those are the type of things that I think we need to be focusing, and we need to be prioritizing. If you work for a not-for-profit, a think tank, anyone that's in this space, you're immensely vulnerable yourself. Your own cyber hygiene needs to be great within your institution. And I don't think that we may be a little naive of how much that and how important that is. That's why we've, at Microsoft, if you're a Microsoft customer, please come see me, because we actually have programs and offerings, something called Account Guard, which actually provides an added layer of defense on emails for not-for-profits, political parties, and anyone in the ecosystem, right? Which is like an added security offering. And so these are things that we offer to our customers in this space in order to try to avoid some of those cyber pieces. Because I think we've been so fixated on this deepfake and the new technology, but we're missing the bigger picture. Just like you're saying, the Democrats are missing the plot where they're saying that's fake. They're missing the plot, which is like, you have a disconnect with your messaging of what people are actually talking about. I think we're also seeing that in just our fixation with deepfakes too. I think we need to look at it as a holistic piece. It is an important piece, absolutely. But I think there's a variety of different things that we need to be looking at as well, and really kind of putting energy behind.
So I think what we're hearing is one of the core issues is that, this isn't just about elections, as we're saying. The health of democracy, good cybersecurity, bodily and image autonomy actually lie in the day-to-day and the long-term, and not just during elections. But it's interesting because this year elections have been daily and global. So I think that's something to meditate as we go forward on, as we move into the future and elections aren't happening weekly as we saw. How can we really have this lens of what a healthy and inclusive democracy looks like in the context of all of our work? So I want to share an interesting quote that I was in conversation with a social media executive just last week, actually, and so I want to talk about truth a little bit here. So I want to do. I can't say which one. But I would like to do like a quick rapid fire, maybe a minute each, on agree or disagree. But yes, I was speaking with a social media executive last week who told me, quote, the truth as we have come to understand it is over as a concept. You know what? I'm going to ask the audience as well. Let's put up our hands. Agree? Disagree? Okay. Suzie, let's start with you.
I think that that's such a convenient thing to say, right? Like, it's such a convenient thing to say. And I think it goes back to this breaking down of like, who can we trust? What can we trust? And it's this saying like, there's no one to trust. We can't trust the UN. We can't trust the WHO. We can't trust academics. We can't trust anything. There is no truth. And I hear this all the time at like Thanksgiving dinners with racist uncles and things, where they're like, I do my research. I do my own research, right? And there's this narrative that like everyone can figure out their own truth as long as you do your own research. And if you go on TikTok, like you can find somebody who claims is an expert for any truth that you want. But I think we have to resist that. And obviously we all have perspectives and there's no ultimate truth for all issues, but there's a lot of truths out there. There's a lot of truths, basic truths that we can find, things like, things like, is sexual assault real? Yes, it is, right? In the way that people are questioning this in some of these spaces. So I think that that's a convenient thing to say, but I think it's such a weak comment.
Justin.
I need you to tell me later which social media executive told you that, because whoever it is, I want to have a word with them. Because, and someone can bring up the swear jar, that is such horseshit.
Yeah.
Because those people, they're the ones that ruined the concept of truth for us. From the very beginning, we had the option of building social networks and information networks and systems online that could have incentivized positive and productive conversation, but it would have meant sacrificing profit. Mm-hmm. And consistently, in every step of the way, these companies opted for things that would maximize advertising revenue and engagement, even as they knew it was creating toxic feedback loops that consistently incentivize lying, manipulation, and deceit. And they didn't care, and they don't care. Facebook, and we talked about this a lot when we were producing our report last year about the state of polarization in Canada, a little shout out for that. But Facebook knew, as it was making changes to its recommendation algorithm and its news feed, it knew that the changes it was making were incentivizing anger-producing content. They knew for a fact that the news outlets who relied on Facebook for their traffic We're having to push more and more extreme and anger-inducing narratives in order to compete online, and Facebook didn't care. Facebook was told by representatives from political parties, hey, listen, the changes you have made, they are forcing us to speak to our angriest supporters. They are forcing us to change our communications tactics, to demonize our opponents, and to ratchet up anger and distrust. There's literally an email where a representative for a far-right party in Europe, or a conservative party in Europe rather, was saying that to Facebook executives, and Facebook executives were sharing that email internally and going, oh well, we need to make more money. This is true for Twitter, especially now. Twitter now is a recommendation algorithm built on encouraging lies. This has been true for Google. This has been true for YouTube in the past. Our social media executives have consistently made decisions that have made us insane, and we have let them. We have continued giving them money. We have continued using their platforms, and our leaders have opted to create regulations that captured these social media giants instead of punishing them. And I think that's abhorrent. I think we need to start talking seriously about how to build, and this is a conversation for this crowd, about how to build social networks that are disconnected from that profit incentive, that are disconnected from that incentive to maximize engagement, to maximize anger, and to make us all completely friggin' insane. And I think we're going that direction. I think Blue Sky, which has exploded in the last few weeks, has completely removed that profit motive, in some small part because they don't have any profits, which will eventually be a problem. But Activity Pub and Mastodon are similarly built in the same idea. I think it's Norman's Law, that basically systems are a reflection of the people who build them, and the things we build are a reflection of the technology we have. We need to build technology that gives us good systems, and we need to have people building them, and we need to have people using those systems, because truth is not over if we choose to continue preserving it. And also, I think we should throw those people in the lake. So anyway.
So I think we've successfully gotten ourselves worked up, which I think is good. Start thinking about your questions, because we'll go there in about 10 minutes. But Marlene, dying to hear your take.
I don't even know how I feel like. And,
I was ready for this last night, so I'm all worked up about it. Anyway.
Justin talk. I think he has something to say. Look, confirmation bias is real, and I think ultimately that's what we're seeing in a lot of cases, and is that you can find an answer that appeals to what I want as an answer. And I think we're seeing that across the board. As an individual, the truth is out there. I think it's based in facts. And I think we need to encourage that. We need to ensure that we have a discourse that allows that in our country and around the world. And it is true. We're seeing that discord. And even my algorithms feed me up what I want to see. I was convinced of something from my algorithms, and it was my confirmation bias of what I wanted to see happen. It happens to all of us. And I, my previous life, I was a political operative, so I knew the truth. I understood what was happening, but my algorithms actually led me to believe something else that I knew wasn't true, but I allowed it to confirm my own bias, right? So.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And I think what's different than perhaps conversations last year or, whenever Twitter was acquired and renamed as X, is now we see this kind of confluence of a billionaire buying influence, essentially, controlling a social media platform and using that for political influence as well. So I do think we really need to keep being wise to the evolution of these kinds of tactics. I would like to get a legal analysis, starting with my next question. What's the balance of free speech in all of this? To what extent do we have a right to lie?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a hard question, right? Because I also think that concept of free speech and freedom of expression is something that's really contested. In America, where their protections for freedom of speech lean a lot more towards protecting speech than in Canada. Where we balance things through the charter, through the Oakes test, so we can restrict speech in particular ways. But there's this really interesting academic, Marianne Franks, in the United States, who's written books about this concept of freedom of expression and how do we think about it. And so much of the way we think about it is influenced by this American narrative that's like hate speech should be free, everything should be free, we should be free to lie, we should be free to do all of all of these things. But ultimately, when we think about like what is the underlying legal core value of freedom of expression, right? It's to protect truth, it's to protect democracy, access to information, access to express ourselves safely. And I'm working with the Canadian Women's Foundation on research about women who've experienced online harassment. And one of the things that we keep seeing over and over and over, particularly for Indigenous women, disabled women, and Black women, is that like they can't exist online. They can't express themselves online. They can't put their photographs of their families online without experiencing a ton of hate. So they don't have freedom of expression, right? When we're thinking about this larger concept of freedom of expression, is freedom of expression allowing every lie, every hateful comment, every threatening thing out there so everyone can say whatever they want, but people can't say whatever they want, even if that is our concept of freedom of expression, because it silences a large majority of marginalized people. And so that isn't freedom of expression. Lying is tricky, right? I lie on the internet, people lie on the internet. I put, you look at my Instagram, I'm just like cute and happy all the time, right? Like we're all lying on the internet, so it's hard from a legal perspective. And that boundary is something that is going to be the massive battle of any form of internet regulation, because the challenge with internet regulation is everything is written, everything is visual, everything is posted, and so it fits in with this freedom of expression legal challenge where everything is going to be constitutionally challenged. And legislators who are trying to find these balances between creating a safer internet, creating like the Online Harms Act panel is going to be really interesting, looking at this balance of when do we cut it off, and when do we limit speech and when do we allow it? I think it's one of the most challenging legal questions we have out there, but I encourage you to try and shift how you're thinking about freedom of expression, to think of how do we allow for safe and vital and vibrant places where we can all participate in expression.
I do want to give both of you a very quick chance to weigh in, if you can try to do it in about a minute, because I do want to get to some recommendations, because that is what our audience is here for as well. But I do think it's a juicy question. So Justin, what do you think?
Listen, I have a lot to say about recommendations, so I'll keep this unbelievably short. Just to say that I don't think the government ought to be trying to play traffic cop online. I believe very strongly in imposing penalties and consequences onto corporations who act badly, who abuse market position, and who weaken the market power of consumers. I believe we have to reintroduce the market power of consumers to take their business wherever they want to go, and Facebook and Google and Twitter have made that incredibly difficult and have fought that at every turn. We need to disincentivize that. Antitrust is a great way to do that. I think the more government tries to split hairs and pick winners and losers and try to draw that line in a nebulous and difficult and fast-moving space, I think the less happy we're all going to be and the more trust we're going to foment. I don't think the government got that balance exactly right on the Online Harms Act, and I kind of hope they make some significant changes to it. But I think this is fundamentally a problem of incentives online. How does the government punish corporations who incentivize anger and distrust? I think that is the real prime question. How do we incentivize the creations of communities that are positive, that are respectful, and that do allow space for people who are often marginalized online? I think that's the question, and I don't think the government is thinking about this.
Marlene.
So obviously our Microsoft is not a social media platform besides, I guess, LinkedIn, but that's, I think, a whole...
Right. We won't throw you in the lake.
It wasn't.
So our comments on this would probably be of this degree. Look, I think there comes a point where regulation and trying to do this content moderation and having governments impose this, you have those that are going to say, okay, we'll do this content moderation. And there's those that are not going to do it. Like the channels like 4chan or 8chan, all of these type of things are not going to abide by, I want you to moderate your content. So it's not going to have the intended impact. I do think, and I think you touched about it earlier, these are societal issues of the fact is that people think it's okay that online they can be really awful humans. Right? That's the issue that that I feel we need to really get to as a society and as a government is, when did that become okay?
Big question.
And and I mean that in a I don't know. I grew up in a small town on a farm. Everybody was very happy. We knew our neighbors, you know, and I feel like maybe that's part of the issue is I don't know my neighbors. I didn't have the influence of social media. Maybe that's why. But I think there are some fundamental issues of when did this become okay?
Yeah, I think let's keep asking ourselves that question over and over. I want to ask one more and then open it up to the audience. So going back to the issue of multi-stakeholderism, which I think this is a great example of, and everything we're doing today. I know, going back to democracy, that elections officials across Canada work in a consortium to really address issues like this, foreign malign actors. What can different stakeholders do? And then for Justin, I'm going to go to you first, and we'll go across the panel. What's your advice for different kinds of, you know, what do we need to see in terms of policy frameworks, and how can we put that into place without slowing down innovation?
I think so. I have a couple of thoughts. First off, government can't solve this on its own. Industry can't solve this on its own. Civil society, academia can't solve this on its own. Like, this is a group effort that we all need to work on. And I would argue that there's a responsibility for us as tech companies to also step up and to do things to protect our electoral systems and our democratic institutions and to help build that trust, which I think is the underlying issue on all of this. We have eroded trust in our institutions around the world. From a technology standpoint, there's a couple of things that we've done. We've called upon ourselves. February of 2024, 28 companies signed a tech accord on the deceptive use of AI during electoral campaigns. And this was like a self-imposed, here are the things we are committing to do that will help with this, right? This was not imposed on us. This was everyone coming together saying, okay, I call upon you, and us bringing that together as a group. Some of those things are things, you'll hear this term, it's called content provenance. It's real. Without getting very technical, like, think of like proving that this is an AI image, so like it's embedded, and making sure that when you use Bing Images that it's embedded in there that this is an AI image and that can be tracked, and if it's been manipulated or changed, that there's a tracking of that. Those are pretty basic things. At Microsoft, Bing Images, which is our generative AI tool, which will help you. If you try today to go in there and generate an image and use the word Pierre Poilievre, Justin Trudeau, you can't. In the US, I think all candidates, right? So you just can't. Like, those are things that can be done today. Is it going to solve the big issue? No, but it's our responsibility to make sure that our products are safe, that our products, we're doing what we can in order to ensure that they're not being used in a way that's malicious. So
I think Marlene, you hit the nail on the head in terms of the word responsibility. Justin, what do you think digital policy professionals like us in the room need to hear and better understand?
Okay, I'll try to make this quick, but there's two pieces to this. One is that we're actually already better at defending against this than I think we give ourselves credit for. We're already more skeptical than I think a lot of policymakers think. And two, the decline has begun, and soon the internet will be enshittified. So this does not sound optimistic, I appreciate, but it kind of is. Just really quickly, does anyone remember there was a big controversy a couple months ago about an AI special that was using George Carlin's voice, and it was all AI generated, a bunch of images, but they made his voice through AI, and they wrote all these jokes through AI. Breathless coverage around the world. Is this inappropriate? Are we disrespecting his history? Is this the future of AI? I started listening to this, and within 5 minutes, I realized this is not AI. This is a George Carlin impersonator, and these are jokes written by a human. And I know that because I went and tried out every single George Carlin text-to-voice generator. I tried to use ChatGPT to write George Carlin jokes. Not even remotely as good as this thing. It turns out it was a project by two comedians who were punking on our expectations about AI. It was literally a prank. designed to take advantage of our conversation and our skepticism around AI, and it worked. Everybody was immediately skeptical and outraged. George Carlin's daughter on Twitter was duped by it, but was also highly skeptical and highly critical of it. And I think it's kind of really interesting. We are quick to jump on and oppose and be disgusted by AI. We don't really like it. We don't think it's very funny. We don't think it's very creative. And that to me says that in the future, we may think something is AI, but we're also very inclined to reject it because it's AI. And I find that really fascinating. What's also interesting is that AI has unlocked the ability to do stuff at scale that we could never do before. Now, I don't think AI in and of itself is a threat, right? There's a variety of different reasons why AI is a force multiplier. It makes it harder to harass. It makes it harder to be an asshole online. It makes it easier to do all this. It makes it easier to be an asshole online. Sorry. It makes
It's pretty easy.
It's going to get a lot easier.
Unfortunately.
It'll make it easier to translate your text into a target language and dupe people around the world, right? So there's a bunch of ways in which it's going to scale up things we're already doing, which already are harmful. And as that happens, it will allow bad actors to flood platforms that are not serious about this with dizzying amounts of content. Twitter explicitly encourages the use of bad AI. It has its own AI generator in there. And by the way, they don't stop you from making content about Trump and Kamala Harris and everybody else.
It's encouraged, in fact, I think, right?
It's absolutely encouraged. And so just to say, we're going to hit a point where if your platform is not serious about this, it will be crap. And you will be swimming in toxic sludge. So I hope that it overruns all our bad platforms, makes them unusable and unprofitable. I hope it bankrupts Twitter. And I hope it incentivizes platforms that do not tolerate this and that encourage positive conversations between real humans so that we do not create a dead internet.
Okay, so I think that's a very powerful closing statement, and I think we need to make some time for questions because I imagine there are a number. I'd also love to be able to prioritize an online question as we take the first in real life here. So can we just put up hands? Okay, great. Can we go to Shweta in the front row, and then in the interest of time, this gentleman over here, and then on that side there.
Hi everyone. I'm from the Public Policy Forum. Full discourse, we worked on a project, How Polarization Manifests in Canada last year. Victoria and Justin and I were part of it. My question is...
The microphone coming.
Yeah. Interest of time, really, I'm hurrying up. While there are, of course, expectations from multi-stakeholders to do XYZ thing, my question is more towards, there is still the issue of young adults and civic engagement. And Justin, you just gave an example, you fact-checked XYZ on different things. When there's an affordability crisis going on, when people are still trying to, sort of find a job, get through things, people aren't really, especially I'm talking about young adults, spending every waking moment checking, fact-checking everything. So while we are skeptical of everything, there isn't time to really fact-check everything that's on the internet. Mm-hmm. So is there an expectation out of young adults in this discussion of what they should do in the short term? I mean, of course, there is an expectation of being more aware, going through multiple media sites and everything before you sort of trust anything. But just short term, actionably, is what could young adults do? Talking about the 18 to 35 who are on social media platforms.
I want to jump in there
go, please.
first. Yeah. So first, I think that we often do not give enough credit to young people. Like, I work with a lot of young people. I've been doing a lot of research with young people on this other project. But young people grew up in this, right? Like, young people grew up in this hellstorm. Like, they have grown up being like, everything is lies, everything is shit. Like be careful. You know, and I think if anything, we could probably learn more from the perspectives of young people who have lived through this, who have lived through this internet world, who have lived through the social media world. And I think, of course, there's a lot of young people who are doing things that are wild. Like, I was listening to like jaw maxing, where guys are like chewing this insane gum to like make their jaws bigger, right? So of course, some of them are getting tricked by the internet, you know. But I actually think that we can go to young people to learn a lot more. Like, I'm a bit more worried about people who are less informed about social media, who are less informed about deepfakes because it wasn't a part of their world and they don't know necessarily how to check it. I think there are some concerns that the primary place that young people are getting their news is TikTok, and a lot of the way that people are getting their news is not from legitimate news sources, but it's actually from news commentators. But a lot of news commentators on Twitter and TikTok are great, right? And they're really informing people. So I think the biggest thing is just, I don't know, having youth share as much as possible, like which sources are legitimate and which aren't, because I think not just youth, but all of us don't have time to fact check every single thing in the world. But I really think we have to be careful about discrediting the intelligence of youth, because I think many of them are probably actually better than we are at smelling the shit on the internet.
Thank you, Suzie.
Yeah.
I want to move over to this gentleman over here in the black shirt, if we can get him a microphone, please. And are there any questions coming in online? Okay, great. Maybe we can do that next. Thank you.
Hello, test. My wife had an 8-month co-op at Microsoft Canada, and it finished before the new building. Like, you moved into the new building, so that was kind of not nice for me because I wanted to see it. But I'm a student. I work with her on a nonprofit. It's called CRC, Climate Resilient Communities. And they use like a multilingual AI chatbot, like Cohere's the one who they use their model, because you can have all these different languages. And I guess the question I had was, so that's an example of like on the ground people doing work. And you mentioned something I was thinking about, which was like AdGuard or something for companies to have like an additional layer on top of email. And you also mentioned like how people refer to these things as memes, even though like they're generated AI. Mm-hmm. So if they're like memes, and we already have memes, does that mean we're just gonna have like offerings from companies that just like filter this stuff out? Like I already have like an ad blocker built in Safari, but like I'm just thinking like if I'm using Bing, does that just, it already sort of has some like safe searches that are like filtered out. So like it just doesn't seem as much of a problem, I guess, if like it's getting taken care of.
That's a great question.
It is.
I mean,
I don't know.
The-
I can't, I don't have that answer for
Thank
you.
you.
Like, I think this is where, you know, is it meet our community guidelines? Is it, these are things where we as a company have a set of like guidelines that we adhere to and that everyone that uses our products and services have to adhere to. So if it doesn't meet it, then perhaps, right? Like, is it hate speech? Okay, well, if it doesn't meet these guidelines, then we can remove it. But then once again, this is where my fear of us trying to block stuff is, where we're saying tech companies have so much power. And we're saying that is it my decision? What's real, what's truthful, and I look to you because I'm sure you have a thought on this. Like, are you just giving me more power to decide what is truthful, what's real, where that actually makes me uncomfortable? I'm not the one creating the laws. I'm not the ones that are determining what's legal, what's lawful. Should I be the judge? I asked that question to you too.
Do you think
Sorry.
you could introduce it in a minute and then continue it over lunch? We can take another question for
yeah.
you.
I literally in 30 seconds. AI is a cat-mouse game. For all AI generation, there's also AI detection. We're seeing this across domains. Content authenticity might be a place where that's useful in labeling. We're not there yet. I know people are working on it, but it's going to be very true for scams and deepfakes, and that's already being put into place.
Thank you for that. Delphine, I know we have a question coming in from our online community.
The question is the erosion of trust in democracy a symptom of societal change or a cause?
Good question.
Let me try and think, and I also want to talk about the youth thing really briefly because I think they're connected. When I'm getting worked up about the question of incentives, especially online, we do have to recognize that we've seen a lot of societal externalities that are hurting trust that we keep blaming on people, right? Like youth who are very much online were talking to us. I was actually going back and reading this roundtable the other day, but youth online are talking to us about how they spend every waking moment in anxiety about discourses that are happening online. Are they not being proactive enough? What if it comes for them? Are they not being, a part of? They're not being part of the right side of history. Are they not calling out the bad things? Are they not aware of who's problematic and who's not? And we've always put this on Gen Z to say, oh well, Gen Z is just so sensorial and they're into cancel culture. how about we talk about platforms that literally are tooled to maximize daily engagement of these youth? They feel anxious in these conversations not because their peers are obsessed with making it a part of the conversation. They're obsessed with these conversations because the platforms they use are doing everything possible, including psychological manipulation, in order to get them to spend the maximum amount of time in those conversations, and they're rewarding interventions that are toxic, that are call out, that are canceling, right? So we do, I think we can help youth by smashing the platforms that are giving them a mental health crisis. Full stop.
Sorry, this was hot off the presses. Australia just passed a piece of legislation today. It's in the Senate. They're expecting it to be passed by tomorrow, which is going to ban social media for youth under the age of 16.
But I worry about that because youth are still going to get social media. They're going to find a VPN. They're going to find a workaround.
Would you like to see my 8-year-old who takes my phone as soon as she walks in the door from school, right? Like,
I think we're punishing youth for doing the thing that we let corporations get away with.
So.
Not your corporation. You're okay.
I know we'll continue this, but I want to make sure that we squeeze in a couple more questions. So can I go to the back?
Yeah.
And then we'll go online again.
Hi, everyone. I'm Luisa. I'm from Brazil. I work in an NGO there, the Institute for Research on Internet and Society. And listen, like you guys talking, I was thinking about a lot of things. But I want to come back to the content moderation that we discussed, like you guys discussed a little bit. And I was thinking if it's not the case of create like a due process for content moderation when we talk about content moderation. Like that means for me, it's like how can we combine the rules for content moderation, but not creating a digital environment that moderate everything and do not respect the freedom of expression. And I know this is like difficult to talk about it, and individuality of like each person, different persons, right? And if it's not the case too, for us to talk more about digital literacy, I think. Because digital platforms, I think they shape the reality and social imagination of people, but at the same time, people also shape the media and the social platforms. So it's like both sides, right? So it's not just about like how society thinks outside the box of technology, I think, but also how social networks shape and re-legitimize certain actions. And at the same time, without like all the transparency that we want from digital platforms. So I want to listen to you, like, about you guys about this.
Was there one panelist that you were hoping would weigh in, or?
No, you definitely have a
thought. I'll keep it so
I'll like to start.
Whether it's the Canadian government or whether it's the EU, their requirement to platforms to build content moderation programs is going to be used by other countries to quash free speech. We are already seeing steps being taken in the US to pervert the conversations we had about enabling free expression and preventing hate speech. We're already seeing conversations about using those same systems to go after anti-Trump voices. That's terrifying. Brazil has a very difficult conversation going on right now, as does Mexico, about exactly this, about figuring out where the line is. But we have enabled part of this problem because we were so forceful about mandating content moderation in the context of Western liberalism. We need to have a conversation about how we create a rule of the road for the global internet, not national internets. We shouldn't have national internets, but we need to talk about rules of the road for the world that protects everybody, that fosters free expression in even autocratic regimes without sacrificing that free expression in liberal governments. And it's a really difficult thing. I think we've got the balance all wrong thus far, and I hope we recalibrate.
I hope you're right about that, Justin.
Yeah, well, and I think the thing that's really interesting too is it's also a question of like resources and commitment on the government side and from social media side. Save X, which I think has changed their policies in a really radical way. But a lot of these social media companies, have decent content moderation rules in place if you read them. But the work that I've done with a lot of youth and a lot of marginalized groups, the challenge is they either don't know how to use them, or they do try and use these reporting systems, but they come up against these blockages. And it's a real struggle. And you see some examples in other countries. Again, they're not perfect. They're not ideal. I am a believer that there should be some content that should be moderated. And I think that we do need some form of legislation to force companies to do it, because they haven't proven to do a very good job on that, and they need incentives to do that. And then, unfortunately, that's going to need to come through law. And what we've seen in some countries like Australia, which has an e-safety commissioner, it started just looking at youth, because the thing that we're very comfortable regulating is child safety. Like, that's the first place that often opens the door to content moderation, and then we move to other places, which is what happened in Australia. And Australia might be going too far with this social media banning thing. But one of the things that they have is that they have a government body that first does research on these types of harms. So they have actual evidence on these harms. They have campaigns talking about healthy behaviors online. They do that work to create the social cultural piece. But you can also call the Australian governments. There is a line you can call, and this is what I hear over and over and over from people who are harmed online, is they said there's nowhere to call. There's no one I can call. There's not even anybody that I can call that can just say what's happening to you is wrong. And often that's the thing that people want to hear more than anything, is just what's happening to you is wrong, which changed the cultural space for it. But ultimately, if the Australian government determines that this is actually something that should be removed, or that this social media company isn't following their very own content moderation policies, they can escalate that. They have contacts in those social media companies, and they can escalate particularly harmful behaviors, and to help get that content down and to help stop those things. And so I think from the social media perspective, they need to be putting more resources into their health and safety spaces. Governments need to be creating spaces where they can take that burden off of victims' hands, and they can actually get legitimate technical, social, and legal help that they need, that also gives them choice. Because a lot of young people that I talk to, they say, if I tell an adult about something bad happening to me online, the first thing that happens is it gets taken out of my hands, and it gets escalated in a way that makes me never want to report again. Or they take my phone away, or they shut down my accounts, or they take away my social media. And so allowing people to have legitimate, well-resourced places where they can get information on a variety of resolutions that they would like to engage in, and then actually having legitimate response from government, from schools, and from social media companies, I think is the most important thing that we need to do. And part of that, I do think part of that is government legislation on moderating social media companies.
So we started with Trump and kittens. And I think we talked about I think what we got to is that this is really a symptom, not a cause. And it has widespread social implications, from freedom of speech to appropriate measures for redress to, quite frankly, economics and childcare and all the other reasons why kids are online at such a young age. So I think, as we go into lunch, which is next, let's think about that whole of society approach, the intersectionality of all these issues. When we talk about democracy, it seems like this big abstract concept, but I think what we're hearing, it's daily, it's very tactical. And I think, a question that you asked earlier, Justin, how do we incentivize trusting, positive communities is one of the biggest ones of the day. So I can't thank all of you enough. I can't thank our panelists enough who were brilliant. And it's time for lunch. What I'll ask you to do is be back in your seats at 1:10 for the virtual keynote with Frances Hogan, but I'm hoping you'll join me in a round of applause for our incredible panel.
Yeah.
Thanks, Justin.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was so much fun. Honestly, I would like to do that again.